The muscle era was fading, but Ford? Still furious. These Mustangs weren't built to cruise, they were built to kill. Quarter miles. Welcome to the fastest ponies of the 1978. This is Top 5 Classic Car. Today, we're counting the 10 fastest Ford Mustangs of the 70s. Raw, rare, and built for speed when the rest of the world was slowing down. Let's hit it. Top 1, 1970 Mustang Twister Special, 428 Cobra Jet. It didn't just wear a storm on its flanks, it was one. The 1970 Mustang Twister Special didn't care about subtlety. With 428 cubic inches of brute force under the hood, it was Ford's middle finger to emissions, insurance hikes, and anything slower than 13 seconds. Born exclusively for the Kansas City district, the Twister Special wasn't a trim package. It was a predator in disguise. Under the Mach 1 skin sat the infamous 428 Cobra Jet Ram Air V8, fed through a functional shaker scoop mated to either a C6 automatic or 4-speed top-loader, and backed by optional drag pack gear with 3.91 or 4.3 rear ratios. Advertised at 335 horsepower, real-world dyno pulls topped 410-plus horsepower, with torque so savage it could snap axle shafts. This wasn't your average Mach 1. The Twister's mission was clear: dominate the quarter mile straight from the showroom, and it did. Running low 13S at 104+ miles per hour on stock bias-ply tires. That's faster than a 1970 Boss 302, quicker than a Chevelle SS 396, and only steps behind a Hemi Roadrunner. And unlike the Boss 429, it didn't need exotic heads or NASCAR dreams. It just needed gas and guts. With only 96 units produced, the Twister Special vanished into legend. Some raced, some wrecked, few survived, but every one left rubber, thunder, and fear in its wake. And just when Kansas thought the skies had cleared, Ford unleashed a monster that made even Cobra Jets seem tame, a fire-breathing boss bred for homologation war. Top 2, 1970 Boss 429 Mustang. It wasn't just fast, it was forbidden. The 1970 Boss 429 wasn't made for comfort or cruising. It was built so Ford could sneak a monstrous NASCAR motor into the rulebook and onto the street. And what rolled off the line was a 1,800 kg warhead dressed like a pony car. At first glance, it looked like a Mach 1 in a tailored suit. Front spoiler, black hood scoop, Magnum 500S. But every Boss 429 began life as a fastback shell, then got shipped to Carecraft, where the shock towers were re-engineered to fit the 385 series semi-Hemi 429 V8. This engine wasn't just big, it was race-born, with aluminum heads, solid lifters, and a bottom end that could spin to 6,000 RPM without flinching. Inside, it felt factory civilized, high-back bucket seats, wood grain, and a Hurst shifter. But under the hood? Pure homicide. Officially rated at 375 horsepower, actual output pushed 500-plus horsepower. With 450 pound-feet of torque, it blasted the quarter mile in 13.6 seconds on skinny factory tires. But it was never meant for drag strips. This was a homologation hack. Ford needed to build 500 streetcars to qualify its 429 for NASCAR. What they ended up with was a street-legal missile with more potential than the chassis could handle. Just 499 were built in 1970. Insurance killed it, emissions strangled it, but in its brief moment, the Boss 429 proved Ford could bend the rulebook, scare the competition, and stuff a race engine into a street Mustang without apology. But for those who wanted Cobra Jet brutality without NASCAR politics, Ford had one last Shelby up its sleeve, meaner than ever, and counting down its final days. Top 3 1970 Shelby GT500. By 1970, the muscle car world was burning out, emissions, insurance, and government regs closing in. But Carroll Shelby wasn't finished. The final GT500 was his last war cry, a street predator with big lungs, broad shoulders, and zero interest in subtlety. Though technically a re-VINed 1969, every 1970 Shelby GT500 came factory-built, unsold from the previous year, and retrofitted with unique front stripes and black hood stripes. Under that sculpted fiberglass nose sat the same thunderous 428 Cobra Jet Ram Air V8, Ford's torque beast, feeding through a functional NACA scoop and into a dual exhaust that roared like distant artillery. Inside, it was Shelby meets luxury, high-backed buckets, wood-grain trim, roll bar with inertia reel belts, and a center console that whispered race-spired. Options included 3.91 gears, close ratio 4-speed, and power front discs, if you could handle them. While other muscle cars were being neutered, the GT500 still hit with full force. Its 428 CJ made 335 horsepower on paper, but like all Cobra jets, that was understated for insurance games. Real output was closer to 410 horsepower, and it pulled 0 to 60 in under 6 seconds, with quarter-mile blasts in the 13.7S at 104+ miles per hour, Shelby quick, yet brutally stable. Only 789 GT500S wore 1970 VINs, and when the last one left the lot, it marked the end of the original Ford-Shelby partnership. The GT500 didn't fade away. It roared into legend. And while Shelby's chapter closed, Ford wasn't done swinging. Next came a machine that didn't need a name to command respect. Just 3 numbers. 351. Up 4. 1971 Mustang Boss 351. The Boss 429 was outrageous. The Boss 302 was surgical. But the 1971 Boss 351? It was Ford's final answer to the muscle car wars. A balanced killer that didn't just rely on cubic inches. It used brains, brawn, and a high RPM scream to dominate everything in its weight class. Only available for 1 year, the Boss 351 came wrapped in the all-new 71 Mustang fastback body, longer, lower, heavier, but with one mission: performance. It wore a Ram Air hood with functional scoops, Boss decals, blacked-out grille, and 15-inch Magnum wheels. Under the skin was a reworked 351 Cleveland HOV8, sporting solid lifters, forged pistons, 11.71 compression, a big Holley carb, and free-flowing heads. This wasn't your dad's 351. It revved to 6,200 RPM and made 330 horsepower squee, but dyno tests suggested closer to 370 real-world horses, all screaming through a 4-speed close-ratio top-loader and 3.91 traction lock rear. Optional power front discs kept things pointed straight when the fury kicked in. Despite the smaller displacement, the Boss 351 was quicker than many big blocks. Independent tests clocked it at 13.8 seconds in the quarter mile, with a 0 to 60 time of 5.8 seconds. Faster than some 428 Cobra jets, and right there with the Shelby GT500. Only 1,806 units were built before emissions and insurance crushed the Boss program. Today, it's a forgotten gem, more rare than a Boss 302, and possibly the best-handling Mustang of the early 70s. And if the Boss 351 was lean, mean, and high-revving, what happens when you bolt that same fury into a Mach 1 body and give it even more street attitude? Top 5. 1971 Mustang Mach 1 351 HO. When Ford killed the Boss 351 name after just 1 year, they didn't kill the engine. Instead, they slipped it under the hood of something more familiar, more approachable, but just as deadly. The 1971 Mach 1 351 HO was the sleeper nobody saw coming. Visually, it was pure Mach 1 attitude. Honeycomb grille, color-keyed urethane bumper, dual Ram Air scoops, and NACA-style stripes slicing down its flanks. But behind the styling, a wolf in wolf's clothing. Under the hood was the same 351 Cleveland HO used in the Boss. Solid lifters, 11.71 compression, 4-bolt mains, aluminum intake, big valve heads, and a Holley 750 carb. While the Boss came with track day stiffness and stripped-down focus, the Mach 1 let you have your brutality with options. Power steering, air conditioning, and even an AM 8-track stereo if you dared to listen over the roar. With a 4-speed top loader and 3.91 traction lock rear end, it still clocked 0 to 60 in under 6.3 seconds and ran the quarter in 13.9 seconds, all while weighing over 3,800 pounds. Most buyers overlooked it. They assumed Mach 1 meant looks fast, not is fast. But the HO option, quietly coded R on the VIN, gave them Boss-level hardware in a package your insurance agent wouldn't flag. Production numbers are murky, but only a few thousand equipped Mach 1S were built. Today, most don't survive with their original drivetrain intact, making real HOs prized rarities. But Ford wasn't done with the 351. In a move that shocked the purists, they dropped the displacement but raised the revs. And what came next wore one of the most iconic names in Mustang history. Top 6, 1970 Boss 302 Mustang. While big blocks bullied the drag strip, the 1970 Boss 302 was out there taking scalps in corners. It wasn't the fastest in a straight line, but it didn't care. This car was designed to turn, rev, and humiliate anything trying to follow it through the twisties. And it did it all while screaming past 6,000 RPM like a banshee in a bullet shell. The Boss 302 was born from Trans Am Racing, and the 1970 model was the final and most refined version. Ford made it a 302 small block with Cleveland-style heads, solid lifters, a high-rise aluminum intake, and a big Hawley 780 carb. The result? A 290 horsepower rating that was laughably conservative. True output neared 350-370 horsepower with a red line of 6,250 RPM, and it loved living there. The body was tailored for speed. Front chin spoiler, rear deck wing, blacked-out hood, competition suspension, and staggered rear shocks to tame wheel hop. Inside, it was all business. High-backed buckets, optional tack, and a Hurst T-handle shifter connected to a 4-speed toploader. Though it wasn't packing 428 or 429 cubic inches, the Boss 302 ran 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds and nailed the quarter mile in 14.2 seconds. Respectable, but deceptive. Its real weapon was handling. With a near-perfect front-rear balance, it could run circles around heavier muscle. In 1970, Ford built 7013 Boss 302s, the last of their kind. As Trans Am rules changed, the Boss name would vanish, and the 302's high-revving soul would fade into history. But back on the street, torque still ruled, and Ford had just the right sledgehammer waiting in the wings, wrapped in Mach 1 sheet metal and stuffed with 428 cubic inches of controlled chaos. Top 7, 1970 Mustang Mach 1 428 Cobra Jet. If the Boss 302 was a scalpel, the 1970 Mach 1 428 Cobra Jet was a wrecking ball. It didn't finesse its way past the competition, it ran them over with brute torque, smoking bias plies and daring you to keep it in a straight line. Slotting just below the almighty Super Cobra Jet, the standard 428 Cobra Jet Mach 1 still delivered fearsome firepower. Beneath the functional shaker scoop was Ford's 428Q in big block V8, force-fed through ram air and bolted to either a 4-speed toploader or C6 automatic. Rated at 335 horsepower, but real-world tests regularly showed 410-plus horsepower and a volcanic 440 pound-feet of torque. Exterior? Classic aggression. Naka hood scoops, chin spoiler, reflective Mach 1 side stripes, and a blacked-out tail panel. Inside, it was full-muscle luxury. High-back buckets, wood-grain dash, clock console, and an optional 8,000 RPM tack. For those who checked the drag pack box, things got even wilder. Oil cooler, 3.91 or 4.3 gears, and factory race intentions. Despite its weight, the Mach 1 428 CJ could hustle. It blasted 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, with a quarter-mile time in the high 13s, making it one of the fastest street-legal Mustangs available in 1970. But traction was always a struggle, especially on narrow 14-inch tires. Ford built thousands of Mach 1s that year, but only a fraction left the factory with the 428 CJ, making them the apex predator of the Mach lineup. Today, survivors are revered for delivering muscle car savagery without apology. And just when enthusiasts thought big blocks were the only way to fly, Ford dropped one final twist, a 351-powered Mach 1 tuned not for brute force, but for cold precision. Top 8, 1972 Mustang Mach 1 351 HO. By 1972, the muscle car was dying, strangled by emissions laws, neutered by insurance premiums, and softened by safety regulations. But tucked inside the options sheet was one final stand, the 351 HO. And if you knew what the R code meant on the VIN, you knew it was still a street-legal killer. The 1972 Mach 1 may have looked like its 1971 sibling, long hood, urethane nose, NASA hood scoops, but beneath the surface, things were changing fast. Most engines were detuned and downgraded, except this one. The 351 Cleveland HO kept the spirit of the Boss 351 alive, with solid lifters, forged pistons, 4-bolt mains, and big valve heads. It was rated at 275 horsepower, net a sharp drop from the previous year's 330 gross. But don't be fooled. Internally, it was the same aggressive Cleveland screamer, ready to spin past 6,000 RPM and tear through gears like nothing else in its class. Backed by a 4-speed and a 3.91 rear axle, it still ran 0 to 60 in about 6.3 seconds and the quarter mile in the low 14s. Most buyers didn't even notice it existed. The HO wasn't marketed loudly, and many dealers didn't stock it. Only true performance junkies knew what they were getting, and knew to check that elusive R code on the order form. Only a few thousand 1972 Mach 1 351 HOs were built, making them one of the rarest performance Mustangs of the decade, and the last to carry true boss DNA before everything went soft. And while the Cleveland HO sang its high-rev farewell, Ford was quietly slipping one last big block into a fastback, a 429-cube bruiser that didn't sing, it rumbled like thunder. Top 9 1971 Mustang 429 Thunderjet. Most muscle cars roared for attention. The 1971 Mustang 429 Thunderjet didn't need to. It pulled up slow, heavy, and dead quiet until your foot hit the floor. Then it woke up like a freight train, all torque and fury, and left tire marks deep enough to retell the story. The all-new 71 Mustang was Ford's biggest yet. Longer, wider, heavier. To move that mass with authority, Ford offered a series of big blocks, but the most street-friendly was the 429 Thunderjet. While not as exotic as the Super Cobra jet, the Thunderjet offered the same displacement, a big 4-barrel carb, and a rated 370 horsepower. Gross! With a thundering 450 pound-feet of torque. Outside, the car wore the Mach 1's aggressive sheet metal, with NASA hood scoops, urethane front bumper, color-keyed mirrors, and optional Magnum 500 wheels. Inside, it had muscle car flair, with high-back buckets, 3-spoke sport wheel, and enough weight to make a corner nervous. Though lesser known than the SCJ, the 429 Thunderjet was still brutally fast, clocking 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds and quarter miles in the mid-14s. It was quieter, more civil, and surprisingly refined until you buried the throttle. Then it dumped torque like a sledgehammer, and nothing under 400 cubes stood a chance. With only around 1,865 units produced, the 429 Thunderjet Fastback remains one of the rarest big block Mustangs of the era, and one of the last to deliver that old-school floor it and hold on feeling. But as big blocks faded into extinction, one Mustang refused to die. It didn't dominate by size, but by outlasting the chaos, and it was the final ember of Mustang muscle in a dying fire. Top 10 1973 Mustang Mach 1 351 CJ. By 1973, the muscle car era was on life support. Compression ratios were down, insurance rates were up, and performance was a dirty word in Detroit boardrooms. But Ford wasn't quite ready to let go. Buried inside the bloated body of the final first-gen Mustang was one last punch, the 351 Cobra Jet. The 1973 Mustang Mach 1 kept the same long hood fastback shape from 71-72, but government safety mandates softened its edges, massive bumpers, lower compression, and quieter exhausts. But the optional 351 CJ V8, coded Q, still packed enough bite to keep Ford in the fight. With a 4-barrel carb, special heads, and dual exhaust, it was rated at 266 horsepower. A modest figure on paper, but with strong low-end torque and decent gearing, it could still hustle. Paired with a 4-speed manual and traction lock rear, it ran 0 to 60 in about 6.9 seconds, and a quarter mile in the mid-15s. Not bad for a car tipping the scales at nearly 3,800 pounds. While the name Cobra Jet once stood for unfiltered speed, by 73 it was a shadow of its former self. Restricted by emissions gear, choked by insurance policies, and buried in a body that valued size over speed. But it was still faster than most of its peers, and in the right hands, it could still move. Ford built 35,440 Mach 1s in 1973, but only a fraction came with the 351 CJ. These final-run cars marked the end of the true performance Mustangs until the revival years later. They were the closing chapter of a brutal, beautiful era. For all its weight and restraint, the 73 Mach 1 351 CJ still fought to the finish. It wasn't the loudest or the quickest, but it refused to go quietly. And in that final bark of big-inch defiance, it sealed its place as the last Mustang of the muscle era with real teeth. Some got banned, some got forgotten, But every Mustang here left its mark, in rubber and legend. Thanks for watching Top 5 Classic Car. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your favorite The 70s Mustang in the comments.